Hi, Jan here with another 3D quick tip video. Last time we looked into all the selection secrets, but today we'll add a little bit more to it with the selection constraints and selection filters. However, last time I forgot to mention one useful shortcut which you reminded me in the comments below the video. So I will just quickly show you. For growing the selection, you can either press Ctrl and or Command and right click and grow the selection, or you can just press Shift and greater than, or Shift and less than to shrink the selection again. So these are two hotkeys I forgot to mention last time. Thank you for reminding me. And let's jump into today's topic. We will start with selection filters, which are actually these small icons in this menu. We'll start with the first one, which is for selecting hierarchies. We'll choose the first icon and just drag the selection. And you can see that we are actually filtering the root of the hierarchy, which is this one and this one, nothing else. On the other hand, with the leave option, we select everything else except for the hierarchies, for the roots of hierarchy. This is for selecting templates if you have templates in layers. This is more important filter menu. Right now we can select everything. We can select polygons, we can select lights, we can select locators, everything. If we press this little arrow and turn everything off, we cannot select anything. If you want to select just polygons, we press this filter, drag the selection, and we select just the polygons. If we want lights plus polygons, we press this one, which is rendering objects, and it will choose everything except the locator because that doesn't fall into these categories. However, if you want to select just a locator, there is this question mark, which is for another types of objects. When you right click, you can see that it's for IK effectors and locators, for example. So right now it will select just a locator. And the last one is for selecting components. It's basically the same as your right click menu. As the vertices, you can see the vertices are active. When you go for edges, it goes to edges, faces, etc. It's exactly the same as your right click menu or F keys, as we mentioned last time. If you haven't seen the last video or the previous 3D quick tips, I will link them in here. Definitely check them out and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss next videos. So these are the filters. Let's continue with the first type of selection constraints. Let me open a different scene for that, which will be better for the demonstration. Component selection filters, as we can call them, could be found in 3 different places. You can find them in selection marquee menu, which you can access by holding Q and left mouse button. It's in here. Or in the tool settings, when you double click the select tool over here, or in the modeling toolkit over here. All of them are exactly the same, so it depends on your preference which one you're gonna use. We're gonna use this one just because I want to. All these selection constraints in here behave kind of like a filter on your component selection. Let's try with edges. And let's try the first one, which is an angle. Right now you can see that it pre-highlights just a single edge. However, if we put the certain tolerance in there, like 15 degrees, it will start to select more adjacent edges. And the tolerance is exactly those 15 degrees between 2 polygons. So whatever falls into the tolerance will be selected. If you raise the number to, let's say, 45, you're gonna get more. That's particularly useful when you are selecting, let's say, we want to select all the edges on the top. This angle is probably above 45 degrees. So based on that, that part won't be selected. And it's a super fast way to select the pieces of geo, like the flat planes. So that's the angle. Then we have border, which is kind of obvious. It will allow us to select just the border edges. If you just drag over entire object, if I delete, and you can see that if I want to select something else, it doesn't work. You have to turn it off. If I delete these pieces, go back, select border, and select border here, or just drag a selection and it will select all the borders. Another one, edge loop, that's self-explaining, just pre-highlights entire edge loop. Same goes for the edge ring, pre-highlights entire edge ring. Shell, that's entire polygon shell, which is like a unified continuous polygon surface. So this is a combined mesh of multiple cylinders, but you can see it pre-highlights one by one. And the last one is the UV edge loop, that just corresponds how your UVs are laid out. So these are like a first level of selection constraints, of selection filters. So let's go to the more advanced and more robust selection constraints or selection rules. So the proper selection constraint, the true powerful selection constraint, could be found in a select and user constraints. This interface will soon get pretty busy and these buttons will stay. So I'll quickly tell you which settings I'm using so it's not that confusing later on. All the selection constraints in this window works with components, so either vertices, edges, or polygons. This setting tells Maya if it should influence everything, including your current selection, if it should keep that selection, whatever. It's too complicated. The only setting I use is all on next, which means that it will select everything and it will filter that selection based on the settings which will appear here. I'm not using anything else because it's so confusing. Same goes for these. If you close and reset, you will lose the selection you created and the window will close. So I never use that. The only button I use is close and remember, that close the window and keeps your selection. All of these you can find in the marking menu, so there is no reason to use these buttons. Same with the propagation, that's additional filter on top, which is the same as the selection constraint and just gets more and more confusing. So the only setting I ever use is all on next, close and remember. That's all from these buttons. As I said before, all these filters are working with the components and the UI is changing based on the component. It's different when I select the vertices, it's different for the edges, and it's different for the polygons. We'll start with edges. Right now you can see that it's selecting all the edges as we have here because all the filters are turned off. However, if I turn on the on border, you can see that just the border edges are selected. On the other hand, inside, everything except the border edges will be selected. Same goes for smoothing. If I select just the hard edges, as on the cube are these edges and the borders, which is pretty useful for, let's say, beveling, or the smooth edges, which is everything laying on the edges. And on a cone, once again, just refresh that, all the smooth edges are these and all the hard edges are these. So these are super simple ones for edges. However, there are way more of them under the geometry tab. The first one is for the edge length, and that's really useful. If you activate that, nothing will be selected. Actually, the better object to show it is this one, which has different length of the edges. So if you go to edge, just refresh that, and the minimum and maximum is 0, so nothing is selected. When we start to slide this, you can see that the maximum value is adjusted. So everything between 0 and 13 is going to be selected. The question is how you determine this number if you don't know how long that edge is. You can use the measure tool or whatever, but in Maya, in bonus tools, you can display the heads-up display called edge length here. And you can see that this edge is actually 3.0 something something. Let's say we want these edge loops. Let's select this little one and it's 0.65. So if we put 0.65, so if we put, let's say 1, you can see that it selected just the edge loops. The edge length is very, very useful when you want to simplify your models. What if I want to delete all these extra edge loops? It's very simple. What I do is just activate the edge length, which will select all these little edge loops. However, it will also select these, but we can combine that with the smoothing, and we know that these are hard edges actually. So let's turn everything smooth. It will double that length filter, and these will be fertile too. So right now we can just delete them and all the edge loops are gone. Super, super useful for reducing your models. The edge length is one of the best. Angle, once again, it will select the edges with the angle range you define here. So it's all the edges till 30 degrees. So if I do it on the cube, just refresh that. Because of these have like 90 degrees and these have 0, so just these will be selected. Also very useful. The mapped area, distance, orientation and visibility are pretty much for special occasions. Like the map area is defining how big stuff is in UVs. Distance is actually selecting components based on a distance from a point, axis or plane in space, which is defined by the position XYZ or vectors. Orientation, the similar thing, just the orientation based on a vector. And visibility is actually if that point is visible within a certain angle from the point in space. These 4 are super specific. I never use these. However, I sometimes use a random, which basically does what it says. Right now, if we just refresh and turn off everything, right now everything is selected. When you activate the random, nothing will be selected because the ratio is 0. When you pull the ratio to 1, everything is selected. When we pull it to 0.5, just the 50% of the edges will be selected. If you want to change the seed, that means which edges will be selected. You just deactivate and activate again and it will select the different edges. That's quite useful for, let's say, greebles if you use it on the polygons. You just select the polygons and extrude and don't keep the faces together. I'll do a transform like this. Beautiful, right? So that was edges. With any other component, it's similar. When we go to faces and select, let's say on border, it will select all the faces touching the border. Inside, exact opposite. I like the other one, which is for selecting triangles, quads, and n-gons. Perfect for cleanup. These are super specific: planarity, convex, concave domains, if it's hold, unhold, if there is a hole or not. That's super specific. I've never used these, but I'm quite often using mapped and unmapped that will basically select all the faces which have mapping. If there is something without UVs, any face without UVs in the filter unmapped, it will select everything without UVs. It's also super useful for finding lamina faces. Lamina face is actually something which is hard to find. It's basically a face laying on top of a face. So if I duplicate this face without the separate and then merge these vertices together, that means that this vertex is just a single vertex, but there are two faces on top of each other, and it's super hard to find, and it's causing like issues when subdivisions and when rendering, stuff like that. So with the topology, it should find them because they are non-laminar faces. So right now, these two faces are selected. You can try to deselect one, and it depends. If you're lucky, just one will be selected and you can just delete that. If you're not, you can just delete both these edges and just fill the hole. So laminar face is super useful. And for polygons, we have the similar options as for edges, just obviously we don't have an edge length, but we have an area. To find the area of your polygon, one selected polygon, is quite complicated in Maya. There is like 10 lines of a script to get an area of the polygon. So it's usually just guessing. So let's say I want to select all these little polygons over here. So I just try to dial in the number until I hit the correct one. So it's obviously pretty small. Just try 0.5 and there we go. I have all these selected. I probably need a bit more to select all the cap. There you go. So if you want to find the small polygons inside of your mesh, to remove them or just to identify them, you can filter based on area. And once again, the mapped area, distance, orientation, visibility is super complicated, not that useful for just a standard modeling. So for the vertices, once again, we have a location on border inside, and for geo, this is pretty useful. That's for selecting, when we activate it, that's for selecting vertices based on how many adjacent vertices we have. So like this vertex has 3, this one has 4. So if you want to select just the corner, we dive in 0 to 3, and we have just corners plus these open ones. Let's say we want to select the pole on the sphere. So we just dial in the maximum. I don't know how many of these edges are we having actually. Let's put 100 because why not? And we raise the minimum to, let's say 5, because that will filter everything above 5. And we have just these poles selected right now. Angle, once again, the same as the edges, and these are the same once again. Just don't forget that you can actually like double these or stack them on top of each other. So if we want to select the vertices on the border, it selects all of them, but we can turn on the random and it will select just the 50% or 38% of them right now. So that's all for this dialog. There is another and probably the last section of the selection constraints, and that's in the UV editor, but we will talk about that in some future videos when we will talk about UVs. So that's it guys for today's video. As I said, these are super specific and very useful when you are importing stuff in Maya from different packages which needs cleaned up, or if you are sending your models to a client, if you are required to remove all the small faces, identify all the n-gons and stuff like that. It's super useful to use the user constraints for identifying all these pieces of geo. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and see you next week with another one.